Everyone, happy Wednesday. Jenna here. A report by the CDC and the National Health Nutrition Examination Survey have found PFAS in the blood of 97% of Americans. And PFAS stands for perfluoroalkyl and polyfluoroalkyl substances. And they are a growing class of 9,000 chemicals made of like carbon-fluorine bonds and making these chemicals unbiodegradable, which then earned PFAS the nickname of forever chemicals. And the PFAS are also a human health concern, as exposures have been linked to cancer, liver damage, decreased fertility, and much more. That's why we're super excited today to be joined by Leah Segedie. And Leah is a consumer watchdog, author, activist, community organizer, and strategist. And she's also the founder of award-winning consumer activist website, momovation.com. So Instagram. Hi, Leah.
Hey, how are you doing? Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited to talk to you about PFAS. You're the expert on this. So
I'm the PFAS geek of the internet right now.
I was just gonna say everyone needs to follow your Instagram because you always sharing really reputable reports, and then you do a lot of testing, which is really, really objective things about these chemicals, and then which we can't find anywhere else. So we're like super excited today to discuss about PFAS.
Thank you. Yes, lots of consumer studies. They're my favorite thing right
now. Okay, so to start, tell us a little bit about your background, like, how you became a consumer watchdog.
For those of you who are parents and might have a little girl at home, I think you're going to enjoy this little story because this story is one of my community's favorite stories about me when I was a little kid. And when you hear this, my life and what I do today is going to make total sense to you. So when I was young, there wasn't a lot of girls in my neighborhood. So maybe 9 or 10, my mom gave me a bike. I loved my bike. It was like independence, and I can, ride it within a 2-block radius, right? So she said, go wherever you want. Well, we had a graveyard right across the street, and I was the kind of kid that did not scare easily. It was a beautiful place. It was huge. It was 2 square blocks, and like to ride your bike in, it was amazing. Well, there was a mausoleum on the side of this graveyard, and it was like a 2-block mausoleum, and it was just kind of lined the side of it. And it was really old fashioned. This is like 150-year-old graveyard. It's really old in the city of Glendale, California, right down from Brant Park, if anybody knows where that is. I don't live there anymore, but that's where I grew up. So this mausoleum had a basement, okay? And I used to explore all the time. And one day, might have been about 9, 10 years old, I opened the door and the basement was open. And so I went down into the dark basement of the mausoleum and turned on the lights and found this office. And inside this office, I turned the light on, and there were all of these small little boxes, little cardboard boxes about yay big. Inside it was a plastic sheath with gray powder. And there were hundreds of them stacked up to the ceiling. And I mean hundreds, I mean like maybe 400, maybe more. And I was just like looking around and going, I'm in a graveyard. There's boxes of powder. I think these are dead bodies. Oh my God. There's all these dead bodies, and this freaking out. Okay. I get on my bike, ride back home. Mommy. Oh my God. There's all these boxes of dead bodies in the mausoleum next door. I don't know what to do. Mom, you got to call somebody. And my mom's like, yeah, honey, that's nice. It was just some story, right? It wasn't a story. I was legitimately found something. Well, my mom didn't do anything. She didn't call the cops. And then I would constantly go back and see if this door was open. I would go down into the basement, see the office. And over the years, more and more and more of these boxes would appear in this office. Okay, so this went on for years. Okay, now fast forward, I'm at USC, and I'm actually going to the University of London. So I did one of those trips where I was in London for a semester. And my mom emails me, or she called me or something like that. And she said, honey, do you remember when you found all those boxes in the basement of the mausoleum? Yeah, Mom. Well, they were just raided by the state, and it turns out you were right.
Oh my.
And turns out you were right, honey. And what was happening was the people that owned the graveyard were accepting money from the state and the counties to bury homeless people and people without, kin. And they never buried those bodies. They just stacked them up in boxes in the mausoleum. And so what I happened upon through my gut was something that was hurting people. I mean, I was drawn to it. I knew what it was right away. I didn't understand as a child that these people could go to jail. I just knew that I had to tell an adult. I told an adult. Nobody did anything about it. But that gives you an idea of what my gut is like, the things that I notice, the places that I go, the things that I do. Sometimes people are intimidated by things that I am not intimidated by. So it makes me kind of the perfect person to do a lot of these consumer studies, right? Because it's all about my nose and my gut. And a lot of times when I pick things off the shelf, the first 2 or 3 things that I pick off the shelf are what tests positive for indications of PFAS, right? And then I'll be like, oh my God, it's everywhere. And then I'll test the whole category and I don't find it. And I just found it in the first pieces that I picked up. So that gives you an idea of kind of who I was as a kid. Now, fast forward, I went to USC. I have a master's degree in communication management. I graduated top of my class, yada, 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 all that stuff. I started working in politics because I really wanted to change the world. I wanted to do something and I wanted to do it me personally. And politics bored me to tears and frustrated me because things are just so slow and there's so much BS going on constantly. I left, but I learned a lot. I learned a lot about all kinds of things. And ironically, I work for both sides of the aisle, so I can speak both languages, which is kind of cool in my work as well, because I straddle both sides a lot with our audience. And I worked in corporate communications. And then what happened was my father got very sick with mesothelioma. And that was when I was pregnant and just had been married. And it was like starting off my life. And I find out that my father is dying. And of course, this was awful. I quit my job. I took care of my father until the very end while I was pregnant, like big pregnant, right? And he made it to see his first grandson be born. He was actually at the birth, sitting behind my head. And my mother-in-law was there too. I mean, again, I don't embarrass easily. So it's like, here, vagina, And then I remember my father behind me saying, Ken, stay behind the curtain. And that's my father-in-law.
That's funny.
Was behind the curtain. Everybody was pretty much there. And then my dad lasted about another 3 months and then he died. Aww. So when he died, it was like, I felt like 2 things happened. Of course, it was the worst thing that had ever happened to me. I was very close with my father and it really impacted me. And I feel like my father, when he left, gave me like some stubbornness, you know what I mean? Perseverance. Stubbornness, because that's who my father was. He was a Swedish man, and his word was his bond. He didn't have a lot to say, but if he said something, it would happen. And he was stubborn. You know what I mean? Like stubborn persistence. So I got the gift of stubborn persistence when he passed away. So I feel like he gave that to me. And so I started up an online business because health was really important, and it was about women. It was just about women, mostly moms, and healthy living. And it just right place, right time, blew up. I had a lot of writers, we had pediatricians working with us, and I want to say we've been in the space for 15 years now.
Oh, wow.
Momivation is, I believe, 13 years old, but I've been online for 15 years. So I've been around for quite a while, like back in the day, like those blogs, right? It's the small little circle and we all still know each other. But yeah, so over the years, I've morphed and changed, and you can see that my site has morphed and changed. And in the last, I would say 7, 8 years, I have become an environmental toxic-free activist. And my goal is to change the supermarket, to change brands, to make things safer, and using activism strategy, my website, gathering bloggers together, doing what I can do and making a difference where I can make it. The one thing is I can't do everything, right? But there are some things that I can do and make a personal impact in. And so that's where I decide to go. So right now for our PFAS consumer investigations, we have an official partnership with Carnegie Mellon and their Institute of Green Science. So I have two scientists that overlook me from there. And then I also have Linda Birnbaum, who was the director of the NIEHS for the federal government for 10 years. And she's amazing. And then, Scott, oh gosh, who can forget Scott Belcher, who we call the alligator wrangler, because what he literally does for North Carolina State University is he wrangles alligators out of the lake, sedates them, and then looks for PFAS in their blood and tissue. Oh, wow. So I have a lot of incredible advisors that inform me on the science and help me put on these PFAS consumer studies. I just feel really blessed to be able to do this, but you can see how that little girl riding her bike and finding a crime committed right in her backyard is the same person who's doing consumer watchdog studies every day.
I love it. I really love the story. And I'm pretty sure all the viewers today will love the story. And I also love how everyone is really benefiting your activities and your activism. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So can you talk about, you mentioned testing for PFAS and can you talk about how you end up partnering with a lab to test these everyday products and, what type of chemicals do you actually test for? I mean, because PFAS has so many.
Yeah, so there's actually now 12,000 of these chemicals. They've added a whole section of them. So officially it's 12,000, but the industry wants to argue about this. But in Europe, they've combined them all to 12,000. So here in the US, sometimes you'll hear 9,000, sometimes you'll hear 6,000, other times you'll hear 12,000. According to Linda, it's 12,000. So I take my tips from Linda. So it's really difficult to test for these chemicals because there are 12,000 and there are only assays for about maybe 100 in a really good professional lab. So if there's 12,000 and we can only find 100 of them, what are we to do? Well, Scott Belcher, my other advisor at North Carolina State University, they can identify about 150 of them. So that's about your peak of what is possible at this point in time. But we still run into that issue. How do we know PFAS are in the product that you can't, and nobody has the money to do all this testing. Because if you were going to test for those 100 chemicals, it's going to be like $1,300 and you're not even getting, and that, you know what I'm saying? So it's just daunting. It's even daunting for the brands to think about it like this. So what we do instead is we look for a chemical marker, and that marker is organic fluorine. Now, if you've heard of the word fluorine and you know a little bit about chemistry, it is the 6th most common mineral that you will find, or element you'll find in the world. It's very common. Fluoride is an example of that. But when you're looking for organic fluorine, it's not the kind of organic organic food. No. We're talking about man-made chemicals. So when I'm looking for organic fluorine, there's only a few possibilities of what I'm finding. One of them is PFAS, and very likely, and I'd say 95% of the time, or maybe more, it would be PFAS. Then it could be fluorinated pesticides. I would caution you to think that that's what we're actually finding, because we're looking in the parts per million, which is really high. And you typically find something like that in the parts per billion or the parts per trillion, which is a lot smaller. So that's why I would say it's really unlikely. And then also fluorinated pharmaceutical drugs. That's another possibility. And I think it's 40 to 45% of pharmaceutical drugs are fluorinated. So there it is. But again, you're typically finding something like that in the parts per billion or the parts per trillion, not all the way up in the parts per million where I'm testing. Now, why aren't I testing down there? Oh, cost prohibitive and not really possible yet. I would say two different things, and I'm really trying to find other labs that'll do it. It's being really a struggle. So right now I'm at 10 parts per million. And to give you an idea of the differences, a part per million would be like a drop in a pool, right? So if you guys can admit, it's really infinitesimally small. Parts per billion would be like a drop in an Olympic sized pool, right? It's a huge pool. And then let me see if I get this right. Parts per trillion would be a drop in 10 Olympic-sized pools, I believe, or 100. I'm not sure which one. Somebody will tell me the differences in the chat room, I'm sure. But it gives you an idea of how teeny tiny, infinitesimally these are. But it's important to understand that with hormone-disrupting chemicals, their magnitude is 900,000 times the particle. So you get a particle that's not a hormone disrupting chemical, it's just the particle. If it's a hormone disrupting chemical, it has got major magnetic powers, like 900,000 times. So these are not chemicals that you want to mess with, even in the parts per million, right?
Yeah.
And so when we have water, you know, a lot of state agencies are passing laws about how much PFAS you can have in water. And they look at that at parts per trillion being safe, like 1 part per trillion. Okay, so that gives you an idea. When I'm finding something at 10 parts per million and above,
that's a lot
of PFAS. Quite a bit. Yeah. So we actually use, I'm not going to tell you the name of my lab because I mean, they're small, and so they get overwhelmed very quickly, but they have been around for decades. Actually, one of my main advisors is Terrence Collins, and he's known as like the green chemistry god. He's over at Carnegie Mellon,
awesome.
and he's the most amazing man. I think he's in his 70s. And what he told me is this lab, he used to use this lab when he was getting his PhD. So that's how long they've been around, and they're very good elemental labs. So doing what they're doing, it's a great choice. And they're now really good at finding things in cosmetics, because cosmetics are really hard to test because they're the oil in the cosmetics separates the PFAS from the rest of the formulation. So if it sits there for a while, it'll start to separate. But they've gotten really good at all this stuff, from all the daunting, investigations they've been doing for me and a lot of other NGOs and brands.
Wow, that is so crazy. So I gave a super brief intro, meaning just like the name of PFAS and what kind of like bigger conditions that they're linked to. So what are some use of PFAS, and what kind of product can contain them?
So when you think about PFAS, this has been around for decades, but it's important to know that what they're doing is they're resisting stains, they're resisting water, and they're resisting oil. And so that's one of the things that I said to you before. They're in an oily mixture. They separate from everything else and pool where the proteins are, so to speak, not the oils. So what have we had these in before? You've heard of Teflon pans, right? Everyone has heard of Teflon pans. Your jackets, your raincoats, anything that's water resistant, Gore-Tex, stain resistant clothing, textiles and fabrics. Like there was for a long time, it was in a lot of carpets. We found it in, things like flooring. Like we've tested it in bamboo flooring and found it in bamboo flooring. Although I do know the one brand that doesn't have it. Check out my site for that. Food packaging. It's really big in food packaging because, of course, we're looking at grease resistance, right? Yeah. And so, your pizza boxes, your fast food containers, those types of things. And then it's in some fast food containers that you would never think of. So they found that if you go to Sweet Greens and you go to Chipotle and you see those bowls that look like they're recycled paper, those are the ones that have the highest amount, actually. So we've been finding things like that are shocking, right? But absolutely true. So you want to be careful of those sugar, let's like they're cane sugar bowls. There are some brands that are not putting PFAS in them. You got to look for it though, because they're not going to tell you on the label for sure. Personal care products. We've done a lot of testing for personal care products. So we looked into green beauty, and I tested originally. Our study tested 83 green beauty products from 49 different brands. And we found it in 65% of those brands. Now, these are indications of PFAS. So I can't tell you what type it was, but we have an indication from finding organic fluorine in these brands. Right now, what I'm testing right now that should be out soon, and I say soon within a couple or few months, is I found it in feminine care pads. I found it in tampons. It doesn't matter if you buy organic or not, sadly. So we're going to be able to give you the real story about which ones are avoiding this chemical and which one are not pretty soon. We're looking at tooth floss and toilet paper. I know, shocking, but tooth floss, we know that there's a lot of this chemical in tooth floss, and I absolutely have found it up into like 94,000 parts per million, something that high, which is shocking.
That is a lot.
And then some as low as 10 parts per million. So it ranges, not all tooth glosses, but we did find them. And my advisors were like, oh my God, this is the scariest category. And I'm like, not all of them are going to be guilty. We're going to test. So I think we've tested 32 brands so far, and that should be out soon. So I'm like, so personal care products are kind of like, I don't know what to tell you about that. Like, obviously you want to avoid things that say waterproof or long lasting, you know, that kind of stuff, or anything that looks like it would be stain resistant, water resistant for any reason. But until I do a category consumer study, I'm always shocked by some of the brands we find it in versus other ones that we don't, you know, and we could talk about that later. Car wax, snowboard wax, those kind of waxes. You want to look for brands that specifically say PFAS free. There are some out there. You can find them. They will advertise being that. So that's easy. Wouldn't have been 3-4 years ago, but today there are these things. Processed food. And so what I'm finding is a lot of things in processed food. So we did an investigation this year, and it was about tomato sauces and spaghetti sauces, right? And I'm believing we tested 60 something brands. And we found 4 brands with indications of PFAS, and sadly, all of them were organic brands, which shocked me. So this is something that we can be finding anywhere. But what was good news, though, is for those of you who are making your own spaghetti sauce and you're just buying the tomato sauce, none of the tomato sauces had anything. So I would just encourage you all to go get tomato sauce and make your spaghetti on your own in your kitchen, because, you know, being more like grandma seems like that's the you know, solution to a lot of these problems, you know, making things yourself and processing your own food in your kitchen as opposed to letting a big manufacturing company do it. So metal plating, semiconductors, lubrications, coating additives. These are things in manufacturing, but also in building supplies, plumbing and electrical applications. We were talking the other day with my advisors, and one of the jobs that they're most concerned in is things like plumbers, because plumbers are really impacted by these types of chemicals, and it's on their hands and they're using them every day. And so that's one of, and different examples of, you know, trades and stuff like that. And then one of the things that we're finding that is so just shocking is the use of biosolids on farmland. Now I'm going to pull you back. For many, many years, farmers have been using something called sewage sludge. Now the organic industry refers to it as sewage sludge, but the farmers refer to it as biosolids. And essentially what they are is these water treatment plants. They treat water and they pull all these toxins out, and then they have this sludge that's left over. Well, it's got a lot of nutrients in it. So they packaged it into biosolids and have been selling it to farmers for decades. And so what has happened is it's a forever chemical, which means it doesn't go away. And in some instances, we don't even know how long it's going to take, which is why they call them forever chemicals. And it's the same in your body. Some of these disappear within months or years. Some of them we're thinking decades. Really, they don't know the answer to this question. So it's just best to avoid it. And then drinking water. And drinking water is also pretty scary, but you will find this in drinking water as well.
Oh my God.
I know, it's like everything. How can I smile so much when there's so much PFAS?
This is so great. But I mean, like we tell people the same thing, you know, right now we test for transient chemicals because we know sometimes we can't get rid of PFAS. So it makes getting rid of the transient chemicals, that less exposure, makes a lot of sense. And also we haven't been really studying these mixture effect. And then we're just like, you know, a study, you probably know it, like just like a couple months ago from Europe saying that the combined exposure of BPA phthalates and PFAS is actually causing way more damage than, you know, PFAS or BPA phthalates alone. So it's like really, really important for people to understand this information and to really do something about it.
It's like that triangle effect, right? It's like it's all these plasticizers, you know, and so one of the answers is to avoid plastics as much as you can. You can't avoid it for everything. I mean, your plastic, there's plastic in your computer and your TV, and there's places where there's good uses of plastic, right? But we know not every use is a good use of plastic, right? And so think about that before you buy something, you know, especially when it's touching your food, you know what I'm saying, for plastics. And you can also find these plastics in household dust, you know, so it gives you another reason to, I hate cleaning. I'm telling you, I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. It's like my least favorite thing to do. My husband calls them Leah piles. I leave Leah piles everywhere. And then, you know, when we were in our other condo, he used to push all my Leah piles together in like one thing. And he'd be like, there it is. I smushed it together, but at least it's contained, right? You know, this is my life here. So you can imagine my husband, he's more OCD, right? And very regimented, and like she's pushing piles in, like trying to contain the Leah. There's no containing the Leah, but he can try.
That's really funny. I mean, we love how impartial you are, and then, testing, even giving people PFAS-free options at fast food restaurants and all those. Like, have you tested any, food or product that you expected to be loaded with chemical, but were actually pretty clean?
Yes. Two areas. So there was that consumer report study that came out on fast food, and we covered that. But what I added to that report and Momavation was additional fast food that we had tested personally. And because Chipotle was so bad, I tested it here in Los Angeles expecting to find PFAS, and I didn't. I didn't find any indications of PFAS in LA. And however, friends of mine had just tested it in New York, and it was full of it. So, that's an instance where I was like, well, they're doing something right in California. And it's probably because we have all these new, we have all these new laws in California that are about to sunset. So they're just kind of like picking up the speed to try not to get caught because, the second it's there after January 1st, they're screwed. Right. So I can imagine. But the same thing is happening in New York City. So New York is doing a lot of that. So I guess they're just a little behind in New York and they're fine here in Los Angeles. I wouldn't say fine because it's 10 parts per million. So it could be underneath that. Yeah. Where I'm testing, we're not finding any indications of it. The other thing that was really shocking was when I did ketchup. My ketchup investigation, which you can find on Momavation, that was one of the first ones that we did. We actually ended up testing for total fluorine. This was before we were savvy enough and had Carnegie Mellon with us. But I got to tell you, when you test for total fluorine, you can get fluoride in that as well. But I have never seen fluoride. I've tested over 350, close to 400 products. Okay. I have never seen fluoride more than 1, 2, or 3 parts per million. So that just gives you an idea. It's like the brands want to say, but in reality, no. But again, so the one thing I thought I was going to find is I tested Heinz ketchup, thinking, processed food, this is going to be the worst. Let's get the high fructose corn syrup one, tested it, negative, nothing. Went to In-N-Out Burger, got one of the ketchup packets, nothing in that. Then I went and got their organic version in a plastic container, nothing in there either. So, and then I tested the rest of the industry and found it pretty much everywhere. So I did more digging and talked to, it's a CEO. He used to be CEO of a really large company and he retired and now he's running another company. And I was interviewing about this because I knew he had overseen the ketchup, right? And so he said to me, I was like, well, that makes perfect sense, Leah, because there's only 3 or 4 manufacturers of ketchup in the country. And so I'm like, okay, so if all of these other brands are using these manufacturers, it's Heinz is the one that was ironically the cleanest one. And in this case, with PFAS, what I'm noticing is when you're buying from big companies, you're less likely to find it. It's actually the smaller manufacturers of where I'm finding it. And so sometimes that's an organic brand. The specialty manufacturers, is where I'm finding it. Why do I think that's happening? I think it's just, maybe the savviness, the quality control. They just don't have all the bells and whistles that these big brands have. Right. And so that's what I think is happening, and in the food industry, at least in the food industry from, in the supplement industry, the same kind of idea. And so, I used to say that big was bad and small was good. But in terms of testing for PFAS, that's not always true. So I just wanted to caution people to, if you're worried about toxicity, sometimes not all the time, but sometimes it's good to go with a bigger brand. And especially check Momavation to be able to figure out, because you'll see it right there in plain sight with the raw data to be able to back up what I'm saying.
We're gonna have to talk after this Instagram live because we're finding some really similar things. We're not ready to reveal the results yet, but very soon.
Right.
But very, very accurately, there's like a huge supply chain issues with smaller brands. And also smaller brands just don't have the resources of getting better suppliers or cleaner suppliers.
And testing beforehand.
And testing.
Because if we're talking about middlemen, if you go with a middleman that's really expensive, they do some crazy testing for you. But a lot of these smaller brands can't afford these middlemen that do all this extra stuff. And so that's kind of where they get caught up, I think, because they don't have the ability to do this testing. Although the testing I'm doing isn't that expensive. I'm not spending $1,000 per product. we're spending between $100 and $200 per product based on what we're finding. So if we find no total fluorine, it's $100. If we find some fluorine, I got to do another test, and that's $200. So, every like detection I get is double the price for me than something that's non-detect. So non-detect's like,
yeah, exactly.
It's like, I feel that way for you guys. I feel that way for me because it's probably been in my home, it's like, and then finding the detections just irritates me for lots of reasons,
Yeah, but detection is so important because different lab method that you use, there's a higher detection limit that you just wouldn't detect, but that doesn't mean they're not there.
Yeah, it doesn't mean they're not there. It just means at the level that we're testing for, it's not detectable. So, and you'll see brands kind of messing with this a little bit. There's one brand, I won't name their name, but they test at 50 parts per million. I've tested their product before and found it about 17 to 30. And so at 50 parts per million, you wouldn't find it. You can legally say non-detect. And so they put that out there, on their website, and it is disingenuous. It's not cool. So it's all about these levels, and you can actually tell the lab what you want the detection level to be. So a brand can operate a test, find where they're at, and say, do another test and give another detection level, knowing that it's going to come back as a non-detect. So there's a little bit ways that you can kind of fidget with the data here. It's kind of like lying with statistics. I don't know if you were in college and learned how to do that. I thought that was the craziest thing, but it's like that. It's like, what do you want to find? And then we'll figure out a way to make that happen, is kind of what I think is happening behind the scenes sometimes.
Yeah.
So.
I think people are really benefiting from your transparency and everything you do. This is awesome. It seems like PFAS are being so much in the news. So why do you think that there's still very little regulation around PFAS?
I think there's a lot of things happening. I think what I learned from leaving politics and working outside of politics is people think that the politicians are going to save us and they're going to do all these amazing things. And what the reality is, and this is for me working for them back in the day, is they wait until it's a tidal wave of concern. And then when the tidal wave of concern happens and it's within their realm of things that I was voted in for, if it's not within that realm of things I voted in, they don't care. But if it's within that realm of things I was voted in for, then they will attempt to change it. But by the time they get involved, the market has already moved to better things. The people have made the decision, and the government just comes in, puts a bow on it, and then takes all the credit. And so what I believe has happened with PFAS is because it's such a complicated issue, because it's so ubiquitous where you'll find it all over, there was no motivation to change. Now that's number one, is really what I think happens, because you got to have this stuff coming from above. You got to have the Congress saying, look into this. You got to have the president saying this is messed up. You got to have the states on it. But that really wasn't there. So in states where they're more environmental, like California, Washington, New York, that's where a lot of the magic happened first, And so once California does stuff, because, nothing that happens in California stays in California. I never say that about Vegas, but it's really California. So in terms of California, once they started passing laws, and once Washington started passing laws on food packaging, and then there was a really great movie that came out called Dark Waters, starring Mark Ruffalo, and the story of that really persistent farmer, that wouldn't take no for an answer, who reminds me a lot of my dad, by the way. But, it takes people like that over decades. And so now, now that we're looking at it, it's like, how did this happen? There's 12,000 of these chemicals. They continue to be approved by the FDA and the EPA. They're allowable in our food supply. There's tons of these chemicals that are actually allowable to be in our food supply according to the FDA. They're called indirect additives. And these indirect additives a lot of them are Teflon chemicals. And it's probably a lot of what we're finding in food, because it doesn't matter if you're organic or a conventional brand, you use the same packaging, you're using the same machinery, that's all the same. So as long as the FDA allows this to happen, it will always be in manufacturing, and you'll find it in trace amounts. And they understand we're going to find it in trace amounts. So I think there's just, no political will in the past. Now, all of a sudden, people are starting to notice, and more states are getting involved. So it's really about power to the people here. The more we talk about it, the more we tell our elected officials, the more we complain to brands, the more it's going to happen. But I will tell you, this is the absolute truth. the changes that the brands can make is lightning fast. The changes the government will make is slow. So it's better to, it's really good to spend your time, harassing these Congress people, your elected officials, but spend more of that time harassing brands because they will change a lot quicker. And that is the bottom line of what's going to make you healthy or not, at the end of the day. So that would be my recommendation. And that's really what I think, just from working behind the scenes. And also, you also have an issue with lobbying. There's this revolving door in the EPA and the FDA.
Right.
And it's kind of like, it's hard to describe. It's like when you live in Sacramento or you live in DC, the lobbyists are the people that are next door. They're your next door neighbors. Their kids are on the baseball team, on your kid's team. It's like they are part of the community. So it's not like I think people kind of don't understand that when they talk about Washington. It's the next door neighbor, right? So if you come in and you work for the FDA, you don't want to make like $60,000 a year. You want to make $250,000 a year. The only way to do that is to work at the FDA for, 5 years or something, and then get scooped up by a brand and work for a brand. And so because of that revolving door, they don't have motivation to rock the boat. They don't have a motivation to really look out for consumers because we're not paying them very much. So that's the answer. For them to fix that, they're going to have to fix that revolving door. I don't know when that's going to happen anytime soon. So again, what I would say is your best bet is to go to those brands and start harassing the brands. If they've been caught with something, you let them know that you're leaving them, you tell them why, and they can earn your trust back if they change and fix this. You know what I'm saying? Like, make it clear to them so that they know. And what we want to have happen, and this is what happens in the industry all the time, like for instance, the organic industry grew like huge. And the conventional world is looking at it. They're losing all this market share. And they're like, how do we get this back? So they start doing natural stuff, non-GMO project, like all of the stuff so that they can compete with organic brands. It's the same. These brands don't want to lose money. Once women, because it's mostly women still buying this stuff. So once women leave them and we treat them like that ex-boyfriend who messed us, who messed us over. Like, oh, no, you cheated on me and never again. You know what I mean? Like, once we treat them like that, they lose our love, and then they really want it back because they're losing money. And at the end of the day, this is about shareholders. This is about stocks. This is about money. I don't care what people say because I'm seeing stuff from behind the scenes, and the marketing does not reflect what the brands are doing, or what they're saying to me. So all of the power is within us. It's always been with us. It's just that we have to start remembering how powerful we are and acting like we're powerful.
Yeah, I totally agree. We also want to inform everyday consumers that we can actually vote with our dollars. So then we can really urge brands to change. And I know you have like a ton of success influencing, brands to make better products. So could you share some of that successful stories?
Yeah. So since we started testing in 2020, and since then, I've had a bajillion brands come to me for help, and I help them free of charge, completely free of charge. I don't have to, but I do. And the reason for that is twofold. My goal is to make all of you safer. So at the end of the day, if I help them reformulate, I'm making y'all safer. And that's my first command for me. And the second reason is if you help a brand for free, they're more likely to open up the world and give you a lot of information. So what I tell the brands is I am more than willing to help you with everything. But what you have to do is you have to share everything with me so that this mind up here has all the skeletons in the closet, right? I want to know, not only can I communicate to the audience to be able to say, we're finding it in this, and this, and be really accurate about that, but also helping other brands that come to me. Yes. I know where all the bodies are buried. And so when they come to me, I really can help them more than the average person who actually, is a professional quality control guy. He doesn't know what 50 other brands are dealing with, but I do. Come to me, baby. Yeah. So okay. So an example is, most of the times when I work with a brand, they don't want me to talk about who they are. So I mean, we can say maybe like 15 to 20 brands is how many brands I've been helping behind the scenes. A lot of them have been successful getting this stuff out of their supply chain. One green beauty brand I can talk about. She was really amazing. She's very transparent. She was like, go for it. Tell everybody. So in the green beauty brand, you'll find a brand called Fit Glow Beauty, right? And it's a small cosmetic brand. So when I put out the investigation, I don't remember how much we found in her. It was probably 50 parts per million in her mascara or something like that. And she didn't see the investigation right away, but a couple months later she did. And she came to me like, oh my God, I can't believe this. I'm so embarrassed. I feel so awful. Please help me make this better. You know what I'm saying? She's like, she really wanted to learn. And I was very happy. That's the best case scenario, because she was coming to me as, you know, everything, please help me to find this. So I send her to my personal lab, you know, which we know is a really good lab. And that's mostly the time when brands come to me, I send them to my personal lab because it really helps them understand comparing apples to apples. And so a lot of those other green beauty brands were getting bad testing. And when I say bad, it's not bad testing, but there's a difference between the testing that I do that's a burn test, and a bunch of the other tests are extractable tests. And so what's happening is when these labs are making this extraction, they can't extract any of the PTFE chemicals, which are all the Teflon chemicals. So they're getting results that say they're fine. Well, my results say they aren't. So that's a clue, right? It's probably a Teflon or a, you know, fluorinated plastic or something. So, but this brand, she knew to come right to me. I gave her my lab. She started testing. Well, at first, when she started testing, she couldn't find anything. She tested everything. She's like, it was non-detect everywhere. And then I said to her, you know, it was COVID. You might have had some weirdness happen in your supply chain. So she started, you know, drilling down with her manufacturer. And it turns out there was one ingredient that they had swapped out and didn't tell her about. And that one ingredient was So as soon as that was gone, everything is free and clear, and she's good to go. And she was so excited because she found out what it was. And of course she gave them, I don't know if she's still with them or not. I didn't get those details, but everything is free and clear now. And that was the COVID supply chain. It was a matter of, you know, all of the, you know, China shut down, India shut down, all these places shut down. All of these ingredients that are coming from makeup are coming from overseas and all kinds of places. And so when the middleman couldn't find it, he found it somewhere else, but it wasn't in her approved supply chain. And so this has actually happened to a lot of brands behind the scenes. And it's supply chain issues. And it's also, it kind of underlines, this is actually a place where the federal government needs to get involved, because they need to make these manufacturers become more transparent to the brands. Because in all honesty, most of the people, you know, that I'm finding this chemical in are mortified. They're not putting it there on purpose. Because this is a contamination issue. And then when it is a contamination issue, it's really difficult to figure out exactly what it is, which is why, you know, they come to me. And but the great thing is, so for her, that was one instance. We've also helped a toilet paper company. I know, frightening. So I've done toilet paper, I've done food, I've done fabrics, I've done all kinds of stuff with different brands. And again, if any brand is watching this, remember, you got to tell me where the bodies are buried. You got to give me all the information, because we're passing this forward. So it's kind of like karma, right? You come to me, I'll help you for free, no problem. I'll spend an hour of my, you know, afternoon talking to you. You know, I'll tell you about all the things we found in other industries. If your industry is similar to that, that's great. But you have to tell me what happened. You have to tell me when you found it. And then you have to prove to me afterwards that you were safe by using my lab and sending products there. So, you know, that is my meeting. And again, I'm doing this for my ladies, for my girls. You know, I want you to be safe. I want your families to be safe. And I know that if I spend a little bit extra time with these brands, it really, really does help everybody become safer.
Yeah. So have you seen any like retaliation or any negative feedback on companies?
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, it's like emails. It's kind of like emails, threatening emails. It's intimidation. I've actually had, I've had brands get me uninvited to meetings. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I mean, it's just like, you know, like the NGOs meet behind the scenes and talk about PFAS. And I had this couple of brands just push me out of this meeting because they didn't want a blogger in the room, you know, but really I'm, you know, monitoring all of them. And so, and these are brands that we're finding stuff in too, you know? And so, in front of everybody, they've got a great talk and they're walking the walk, you know, but they're saying a lot of great things, but behind the scenes, I'm finding something very different. So sometimes when you see certifications say that they don't allow PFAS, it's not that they're forcing them to test. It's just that they're saying, don't add it. And so, you know, it's not always in data sheets, you know, And so do we have a little bit of time for me to talk about different places that it's in? Okay. So a lot of times when we're finding things like in food or like in fabrics, and it's not intentional, there's a difference between intentional, like period panties, it's probably there for a reason. But if it's in something like, oh, I don't know, food, it's not there on purpose. So a lot of what I'm finding issues is lubrication on manufacturing equipment. You don't think about that, but 40 to 45% of all lubrications that are sold for these manufacturing companies are fluorinated. And so the timing of that could be very valid. So if and I'm telling you, because you know how I found those dead people, I always know the timing with the testing too, right? And so there's been stuff where I've found stuff and then tested months later and it's not there anymore. Do I necessarily think that the issue is gone? No, because if it's fluorinated manufacturing equipment, it gets aerosolized into the air and it drops down on things, right? And so the timing of when they apply it would be really relative. The other thing that I'm finding in is non-stick coatings, right? So we all know about Teflon pans, and we got rid of our Teflon pans, but the manufacturers didn't get rid of the non-stick coating on their manufacturing equipment. So we could be finding a lot of that. Plastics is a big issue. It's not all plastics, but we're finding it in a lot of storage containers and things like that. So a couple years ago, this has to do with the pesticide industry being innocent of something, which I thought was so ironic. But so the pesticide industry, a lot of these pesticide companies were tested by, I believe it was the EPA, and they're finding PFAS in their pesticides. And they're like, what the hell? It's not in your formulation. And they're like, we didn't do it. And they're like, really? And they're like, no, we did it, And it turns out they tested the plastic containers these pesticides were in, and that's where they found it. Now, it's not always in the data sheets. So when these brands, this is the hell the brands have to go through. When the brands have something in plastic, say it's a storage container, what have you, they will tell me, oh, no, it's not a fluorinated plastic, but there's no way to really find out unless you test it. And we found it several times. So fluorinated plastics, storage containers, wrapping, we found it in like mascara. So like mascara packaging and stuff like that, like in the, the lash thing called? The lash. Stuff like that. Right. So, and the brand will say it's PFAS free, but they've not tested it. And if it wasn't on the data sheet, that doesn't mean that the plastic hasn't been fluorinated. Now, why do these plastic companies fluorinate plastic? Well, that's because there's certain plastics, which are the quote unquote safer plastics. So the number 1, the number 2, and the number 5, right? Those are the plastics that work quicker over time when there's a lot of chemicals inside, so pesticides is a good example. I think those were number 5 plastics, and they were fluorinated to kind of shore them up. Now, why would they do this? Because over time, the chemicals warp the plastic and it makes it look like, heat's been applied or something's wrong with it. So, the consumer doesn't want to buy that. So these companies have been fluorinated plastics for things like shampoo bottles, certain types of food, and they've been doing it out in the open for years. And some manufacturing companies are telling you and others are not. And so I don't know why, but there really isn't a law to force them to tell the brands either, which is something that needs to be fixed. But that's what we're finding. And then a lot like other things, like there's these things called totes. And tote sounds like a cute little bag, but it's not. It's a big, huge plastic vat and something that you would have like, I don't know, like say you have chia seeds you're getting them from Peru, right? You're getting chia seeds from Peru, and they would put them in a big, huge vat storage container and send it over the ocean to the United States, right? That vat could be fluorinated with fluorinated plastic and overheat. And, it's like these things aren't air conditioned, just, what I'm saying? And right. And so heat and time, it can pull it out of that plastic and put it into those raw materials. So those are a lot of things of the contamination points that we're seeing when things are not really intentionally added. So it is really very much a nightmare. It's a little bit of a nightmare for brands. Again, it's another reason why I do what I do, because I love being helpful and I want you ladies to be safe. So that's what I'm finding. That's what we're finding.
Wow. Amazing. So, okay, let's talk about ShiftCon because it's coming up in October. What is this virtual conference? Tell us about it.
So ShiftCon Social Media Conference is a conference that I founded, I want to say 7 years ago or something. Like COVID makes me like, what year is it? So it was founded like 7 years ago, and it's green green bloggers, bloggers that are into food, wellness, anything that has to do with, if anything that I'm saying is remotely relevant to your life and you blog, you want to be there because we've been getting us all together for many years. This year it's October 13th to the 15th in Westlake Village, which is just north of Los Angeles. Right, it's right by my house, but I didn't have anything to do with that, ironically. I know it said I'm the founder, but I don't run it anymore. Ari Adams runs it now. And so that's why I could say you had nothing to do with the location. I just lucked out this year. So it's right by my house. And so we get and hundreds of bloggers together with brands and NGOs, and we kind of sing Kumbaya. We bring in scientists. It's just like, it's kind of like the place that you can go where if food's important to you, if activism is important to you, we are speaking your language. We can help fill that cup up for you that you need emotionally, of people that understand you and get you. We also do a lot of like education on, how to do things better online. And so you have all of these amazing experts, that are influencers that are doing really well, teaching you to do things like, how to do it and what we're doing right now better, right. Like SEO, all of those nuts and bolts. That's what we do. And then we have a lot of partying. We bring in organic wine, there's so much organic wine. And I'm actually like, when we bring in the wine, I'm like disappointed because y'all should be drinking more, but I always end up having to take a lot of it home. I'm not a big drinker. So I like every time people come over, I'm like handing them wine out the door,
That's a good problem to have.
I know. I always have something for people when I come over.
I'll have to make sure I'll visit you at some point to get some of your organic wine. Wow. So thank you so much today for this great information. I think we're going to have to invite you back on and talk more specific about all the product testing you've done, because this is like such good information. But I think in the meantime, like, we want everyone to follow Leah and Motivation, check out the website, and because you have like so much just great resources and we have all the stuff
on in one place. That's for sure, right? Come to the site, and we have category investigations on pretty much any product you've ever purchased, from like from air purifiers to, shampoo and sunscreen and all kinds of stuff. And a lot of things I've PFAS tested, but not everything I have. Sometimes I need it, sometimes I don't. But you can find everything based on ingredients, on, hormone disrupting ingredients. And we separate into categories of not our favorite, got to say that for legal reasons, better and best.
Awesome.
So come on down.
So somebody just asked a quick question. Your favorite lipstick brand?
Oh my gosh, you're so funny. Definitely Beauty Counter and Crunchy. I know one of the things that I found is the MLM companies, the ones that are already very green, are the quickest to make changes when I come knocking. And so some people come down on MLMs, but I have found it to be the opposite. And I ask you this question: what master do they serve? They serve you ladies directly. And so they don't want to have a black eye. So they will change like that. And that's been my experience with them, a lot of them behind the scenes. So Beauty Counter, I love Beauty Counter. I love Crunchy for lipstick. I'm actually wearing Crunchy right now. I have a lot of their stuff upstairs, and I do these things and then they send me stuff like crazy, so
that's awesome.
It's don't ever ask me what I buy, because I'm never buying anything. People are always giving me stuff. And so it's a matter of, oh my God, I'm out of something. And then I buy something based on my own investigations. But a lot of times, I get to try out all kinds of brands. But I also like 100% Pure as well. That's a great brand. We actually tested them, and they were one of the very first clean ones. If you go onto motivation.com though, you can see that we went from having 6 clean green beauty brands to I think it's like 10 or 15 now. So we've added more to that. So it started with 83 products that we tested. Now it's well over 100. So I think it's like 108 or something like that we've tested.
Wonderful.
And so go and find a brand from that category and you'll be happy. Those are the ones that are really looking out for your health.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Leah.
Yes. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
We'll talk soon. I'm going to message you right now.
All right, girl. We'll talk soon.
Bye. Talk soon.
Bye.
Bye.